From costing teams games at Worlds to flying champions to players instantaneously respawning after dying in teamfights, these are some of the craziest game-breaking moments in League Esports history that will only get increasingly wilder as we progress. So let's kick things off with a potentially finals-changing bug from the most recent LEC Winter Finals. In the region's first championship of the year between G2 and Mad Lions Koi, everything initially seemed to be going well, with the series being unexpectedly close with a 1-1 tie headed into Game 3. And even in this third game, things were certainly on a knife's edge, as there was only a difference of 300 gold between the two teams, with G2 having more dragons while MDK had more void grubs plus a recently acquired Baron buff. But as tensions mounted and a fight broke out, viewers noticed something that may have given G2 an unfair ability to take what would have been just 1 or 2 kills and manage to turn it into almost a clean ace. And as pointed out by a Reddit post shared with Casual on stream after the game, if we rewind the match, we can see that throughout the course of this fight, the empowered blast cone is used not once but twice, which is a clear bug that undoubtedly would have been chrono braked if anyone had noticed it. Because as you can see, while this first usage knocks both Talia and Bel'Veth out of harm's way as intended, the blast cone itself never actually goes on cooldown, which allows for the Viego possessed Rel to fly over the wall and ultimately lead to an additional 3 kills in G2's favor. And as an honorable mention, during the final game of the series in yet another close match between the two teams, the official LEC stream simply went black and crashed altogether, which led to fans missing Yike's first LEC pentakill and G2 bringing themselves back into the game. But this isn't the only time that champions have caught too much air in pro play, as there are 2 especially notable instances in which champions were sent soaring in competitive matches, with the first being in a 2016 summer split series between Team Liquid and Cloud9. With the game slipping out of the grasp of C9, the team opted to execute a 4-man dive on the scaling enemy Rise, and while this play initially would seem successful at first, things went wrong quickly as the enemy Trundle caught some hang time.
Wants in, but he has to flash out to safety. Whoa! Comes back down and takes out Sneaky, but he's gonna die for it.
Now, while Rek'Sai's Umburo is supposed to knock enemy champions airborne upon re-entry, it seemed to have an especially powerful effect on Trundle, which prompted the match to be remade. But even still, Rek'Sai wasn't the only champion to send enemies flying off the map, as during MSI 2022, Nautilus tried to convert Leona into a Lunari by sending her on a round-trip journey up to the moon. You see, during a match between Evil Geniuses and Order during the group stage, while the camera was focused on the tri-brush battle between Gwen and Graves, the game suddenly paused mid-fight, much to the surprise of both casters and fans alike. And after further investigation behind this seemingly sudden stop, we were finally treated to what happens when you mix a Nautilus Dredge line with a Leona Zenith Blade, and the result was quite entertaining to say the least. But even though these types of issues can usually be resolved by Riot's Chrono Break rewind technology, there are still 2 times in which Chrono Break failed to execute, both having different outcomes and both showing that even fail-safes still can in fact fail after all. Beginning with the more recent instance of the two, when a match between Fnatic and XL during the LEC's 2021 spring split, 34 minutes into the game with the favor leaning towards a soul-empowered Fnatic on Baron, a bug that initially seemed to be champion-based had a much bigger problem than expected. As seen in this replay, even after Fnatic Samira is killed and enters her Guardian Angel revival time, her ultimate is still able to be used and grants her a shutdown on the enemy gangplank. And while many initially speculated that this would be a Samira-specific bug, as she was relatively new to the game at the time, after some testing and analysis by vandiril, it turns out the bug was more complicated than one may think, and instead of Samir being the problem, it was actually Azir, or more specifically, Azir's ult. Now, Emperor's Divide is renowned for having a fair share of bugs over the years. However, in this case, it was the result of a flawed interaction with Guardian Angel, and in this game specifically, it could only work if Samira was level 16 or above, and here's why. What had happened was, for whatever reason, if Azir ult killed a champion that was protected by Guardian Angel, for a brief period of time, any of their abilities could be used, so long as they had no mana cost, in this case being Samira's ult, which costs nothing to use but only once it's fully upgraded. But what this also meant was that this flaw could also be used on other champions during that time as well, such as Yasuo and Yone's ultimates being used while they were still in their revival states. And as for the results of the game that this bug had happened in, after almost an hour-long pause, the game was unable to be chrono break, causing the teams to have to play a rematch that started at midnight the same day, which Fnatic ultimately won, but at least XL had the chance of a remake, unlike Clutch Gaming in 2018. And what makes this bug even crazier is that it didn't just pause the game, it deleted the game in its entirety and forced Riot for the first time ever to make an executive ruling on a match's outcome. Now this is probably the most complex bug on the list, as even though most bugs have an identifiable source of when they occur, this one just seemed to happen out of nowhere, and though it took for a while for anyone to figure out why this was the case, there did seem to be two main culprits behind the problem, Taliyah and Karthus. Initially, these two were singled out as potential suspects to cause the bug since they had been recently causing similar issues in ranked games, and as it turns out, this was due to their abilities being coded as invisible minions mixed with a weird fog of war glitch. As I'm sure some of you are aware, many of the elements in Summoner's Rift are technically coded as minions, and this includes some champion abilities, and all this normally isn't a problem until there's a bug in which all of those invisible minions created by using those abilities don't ever despawn in Fog of War for some reason. Essentially, what had happened in this LCS game was that because Taliyah was a jungler, therefore often using abilities out of vision, all the invisible minions created by this frequent ability usage never despawned, eventually driving the CPU usage to 100% and killing the game entirely. Karthus was also deemed to be a common problem in this matter as well, as though he wasn't in the game, he too has a spam reliant clear that would also create lots of permanently invisible minions, but as mentioned previously, this LCS incident was noteworthy for another reason too. This marked the first time in competitive League history that instead of the game being remade from the start, League officials ultimately decided to reward Echo Fox with the outright victory due to how favorable their lead was. And while some fans were unsurprisingly vocally opposed to this decision, if we take a look at the numbers across various leagues as well as the current state of the game, it was undoubtedly the right call. But once again, League server issues have now become mainstream esports news, as recently in the LCK we've seen a lot of DDoS attacks interrupting live matches at a rate never seen before. And this included a best of 3 series that ended up lasting 8 hours long during the first weekend of these attacks, which prompted the LCK to do a deep dive into their security and take measures to ensure this didn't happen again. But while the next set of live stream games in which Gen G ran through KDF initially seemed fine, once reigning champions T1 stepped onto the stage, there was a brief pause 4 minutes into their game, but after a caster curse, things began to only fall apart more from there.
So far, so good in terms of ping for the moment. Happy to report the gameplay is still going.
I really wish you didn't say that.
I don't believe in jinxes.
Yeah.
All right, fine, Valdez, I'm sorry.
But as for why these attacks are being so especially problematic, the LCK has explained that the attack patterns have been constantly changing, making it increasingly challenging for them to find a consistent solution to these problems as the region doesn't play on private LAN servers. And though the LCK may be a bit of a mess at the moment compared to the bugginess of Worlds 2022, at least its shortcomings aren't happening on the international stage in some of the most important matches of the year, such as the major tower bug that took place in a rematch between Fnatic and EDG. Looking for the first couple of kills in the game through the help of a stacked bot wave and the third member, Fnatic positioned for a risky tower dive onto reigning world champions Viper and Mako, which ultimately scored a small victory for the trio as they scored a kill and crashed the wave in for a 1-for-1 trade. However, some viewers noticed things seemed a bit too easy for Fnatic's jungler Razork, so let's run that play back and see what's up. Initially, things are going as expected, with Nautilus damaging Jinx first to soak up as much tower aggro for his teammates as possible, but once he dies, that's when things go south. If we slow this play down, we can see that Poppy clearly slams Jinx into the wall with heroic charge, yet even though this is a damaging ability that also stuns and kills Jinx in the process, the tower just ignores this and starts firing on the minions as if nothing was happening. And as for why this bug may have occurred, on the Worlds 2022 patch there was an issue where if Champion 1 started damaging an enemy under turret while Champion 2 applied a burn effect such as Ignite, Champion 2 wouldn't take any damage from the turret once Champion 1 died. But even though Poppy of course had Smite instead of Ignite at the time, to apply this burn damage bug, shortly before Nautilus died she did hit Jinx with her buckle, which applied red buff burn damage instead, likely sparking this interaction. And though this insane oversight wouldn't end up making too much of a difference in the grand scheme of things, these next two bugs certainly had some serious consequences to them, first starting off with G2's match against world's favorite and LPL champion JDG. After finding a surprisingly good teamfight to catch the Chinese squad off guard, G2 managed to pull themselves into a slight gold lead over their opponents, and nearly 34 minutes into the game, the game-deciding fight broke out.
Oh, could be in trouble here. Does use the unbreakable will. Caps diving forward as well. The Weavers will block them all. And Encore is massive yet again, and the resets are now starting to come through. Yagao goes down. Hojo is doing so much damage, and the resurrection does not seem to matter whatsoever. There is the 7 damage, and JDG, they might just win right here.
Now, notice how the caster said the resets for Darius were coming out? Well, they should have, but they didn't, and unfortunately no one on G2 seemed to notice this game-altering glitch either, which very well could have cost them the game. According to Darius' ability description, if a champion dies whilst Darius is casting his ultimate, both the cooldown and mana cost are refunded and he's able to use the ability again instantaneously, but in this case this refund didn't actually happen. As you can see in these comparative frames from the CBLOL broadcast, which actually shows Darius' ability timings, his ult is cast prior to the kill on Talia occurring, yet after Graves takes the kill, the ult goes on full cooldown for over a minute. And while these ultimate resets on their own may have done some additional damage to JDG, what really matters in this case is a critical part of Darius' kit known as Noxian Might, which, when acquired by applying 5 blood stacks or landing an execute, will grant Darius an absurd 180 additional AD temporarily, as well as the ability to instantly bring any enemies that he strikes to 5 stacks, meaning his ultimate will always be doing its full true damage amount when it connects. And though Darius would have still needed to successfully land another ultimate, there was already a fully stacked Renekton right next to him that would have died had Darius been able to use his ult. But even though this was of course a tough pill for G2 to swallow, at least it didn't contribute to being knocked out of Worlds entirely like the now infamously chaotic ending between GAM and Top Esports. With this match being already far closer than A1 had predicted, the game grew more and more tense, especially for Top Esports, as this bout was basically a must-win to avoid an early flight home despite being the LPL's number 2 seed. But thankfully for the team, despite being tested for the better part of 40 minutes, they had finally found themselves with a sizable gold lead, elder buff, and a chance to reignite their world streams, and despite their rocky start, all he had to do was take out the Nexus.
But he bought enough time that I think GAM can live. Levi's up in 1 second, but the rolling with the new wave. Will with Shady getting by the stunts. Wayward still on. Wayward still hitting. Stays alive. It's 10 on Knight, 10 on Wayward. And we're going Nexus alive. Will it be enough? Tenway comes across. Tien hitting as hard as he can. Looking for it now. On to the Nexus they go. Will it be the
Now this was an incredible upset by GAM, no doubt, as they were winless in the group stage, and being a minor region team, most people expected the major region powerhouse Top Esports to absolutely run through this team at the very least. But unfortunately for Chinese fans, this wasn't in the cards. However, while the celebration poured in for GAM's insane Nexus to Nexus comeback in an already entertaining match, controversy began to brew as it was revealed that Lucian's Maw of Malmortius lifeline did never actually trigger despite going on cooldown as if it did. Now the way that Maw is supposed to work is that when a champion, in this case Lucian, falls below 30% health, they are to receive a decent sized shield that negates magic damage, and during this version of the game they would also receive 10% Omnivamp as well. Yet when Karthus ults, Maw is never triggered despite it going on cooldown, and the way this interaction is supposed to work is that even if Lucian wasn't below 30% health when the ult hits, lifeline still should have been triggered regardless to protect Lucian from a good portion of its damage, but as we can see, this didn't happen. And to make matters worse, had Lucian had even a bit more health, he would have been able to use his Lightslinger passive to double auto the Nexus, which would have sealed the game, but as we know by now, Riot Spaghetti Code doesn't care about how much you deserve to win. But what if I were to tell you that there was a bug that caused LCK players to instantaneously respawn not once, not twice, but 3 times in a single game, and we still aren't entirely sure as to why it even happened. In a match between DRX and Nongshim, in the middle of team fights, players were being instantly revived in their own bases, and even the teams themselves weren't sure why this is the case or really how to deal with it. As we can see here, Amumu was killed in the fight after using stopwatch, yet when you look at the minimap, he instantly respawns in his base not even a second afterwards, and thankfully for Nongshim, DRX's barrel was a good sport about this and just waited out what his death timer would have been. And not only did this bug happen to Leona just a few minutes later, but as DRX closed out the game, this bug was put on full display during a celebratory fountain dive, which is an insane sight to see. Feel free to check me out on all my other socials, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and with that being said, hope you guys have a great rest of your day or night. As always, I'll catch you in the next video. Later!